We gaan verder met het ezelsoor. Dat is een rubriek waarin denkers vertellen over een filosofische passage die ze eigenlijk blijft achtervolgen. Dus zinnen die ze met een dikke stift onderstreept hebben en waar ze telkens weer naar terugkeren voor inspiratie. En vanavond praat ik met filosoof Seunghyun Song van de Universiteit Tilburg over de Caribische psychiater en filosoof Frantz Fanon en waarom zijn werk over de koloniale erfenis van geweld en onderdrukking nog steeds zo actueel is. And I will switch to English for this part of the evening, so please give a warm applause to philosopher Seunghyun Song. Please sit down. Here it is. Welcome.
Hello.
You brought a passage from psychiatrist and the philosopher Frantz Fanon.
Yes.
And he was only 36 when he died of leukemia in 1961, and yet he is one of the world's most influential anti-racist and post-colonial thinkers. And I thought maybe for the people in the audience who don't know who Frantz Fanon was, can you briefly describe him?
Yeah, so he wrote this book, Black Skin, White Mask, which is really, really famous. Well, first, he's a Martinican, and he was a psychiatrist, but he also wrote his dissertation in philosophy, which was later published as a monograph, which is called Black Skin, White Mask. And it's one of the most influential books out there that really kickstarted a conversation about something called phenomenology of race. He's a very emotional writer as well. So if you want to pick up a book that's literally this thin, but it's really a page turner and quite a nice read. So yeah, nice writer, good philosopher.
Nice writer, good philosopher.
Yeah.
And he was born in 1925 in the Caribbean island of Martinique, which was at that time a French colony. Why can't we separate his work from the context he grew up in?
So he grew up in this weird period. It was a colony, but it later voted and became a part of France. Mm-hmm. So he was in this weird phase where the environment was colonial, but not per se a colony. So it was very easy for him to see the impact of continuing colonialism that could be separated from colonization, which is the history of being colonized by a colonist such as France, right? The imperial France.
Yeah.
So the reason why his work is so important is because he's actually talking about the context that had happened, where Martinique voted to become a part of France.
And the impact which it had on himself?
The impact of colonialism on people who were colonized. So people who were made into people of color, so black people, and how that differed to the treatment that white people got in the context of colonization.
Yeah. So let's dive into a passage from his book which you mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
Black Skin, White Mask, which he published in 1952. You brought a passage. Can you please read it for us, if it's possible? Because it's quite far away, I realize now.
Yes. The black man or black people arriving in France will react against the myth of the R-eating man from Martinique. He will become aware of it and he will really go to war against it. He will practice not only rolling his R, but embroider. He's French, by the way. He speaks French as a mother tongue, so he's talking about the sound that I cannot make, that French people make.
Right?
Good illustration, thank you. Furtively observing the slightest reactions of others, listening to his own speech, suspicious of his own tongue, a wretchedly lazy organ. He will lock himself into his room and read aloud for hours, desperately determined to learn diction. I chose an unknown part of the book for funsies.
Yeah.
So
why?
So I'm a linguistic justice scholar, so I work on language or the impact of being discriminated against because of your linguistic background. And this kind of intersects very well with my work. And also, it explains his main idea, which is called epidermalization of inferiority complex, which in lay people term, it can be a lay people term, it can be translated into internalization of discrimination, which is something that we are very used to, because a lot of people say, because of racism, we internalize it. And actually, after chapters, like 3 or 4 chapters describing in many different contexts, he not only talks about language, but sexuality and education and all that. And he basically talks about how the way that people often understand internalization is really wrong. It's a myth. People don't end up thinking they're inferior. The crux of inferiority complex or internalizing discriminatory practices such as racism is not you end up believing that you're inferior. It's adopting the standard that is not yours, such as your accent. So he speaks native, so French as his first language, his operative language, his education language, but obviously he speaks with a different accent, right? But when he goes to France, he doesn't want to be treated as somebody who speaks a lesser version of English, French, which is also happening to Indian English, for instance, or whatever English that you want to pick that is not the Anglo-Saxon English, let's say. So you put on an accent that is not yours.
Yeah.
And that's what it means to internalize an inferiority complex. And that's not because that you think that you are lesser, but it's because you think that you will only be recognized of your value if you adopt somebody else's standard.
Yeah. What strikes you the most in this passage? Because there are lots of interesting. He talks about the R-eating man, furtively observing the slightest reactions of others. What strikes you the most in this?
The honesty, I think. It's quite honest. I think he is trying to show what people undergo when they're trying to negotiate their existence in a racist world, basically. He, because he has like multiple. He's a doctor, and he is also he has like many degrees. He's brilliant. He was a really brilliant thinker. But of course, when he walked into the doctor's room as a doctor trying to treat patients, he's treated as like a servant, basically, which is not too dissimilar to many people's experience here in the Netherlands if they're racialized. So the relevance is there also. Honesty and relevance, I think.
Yeah. And who are the others that are so important to the R-eating man?
Who are the others? Oh, the powerful. Yes, the privileged.
The privileged.
Yes, yeah. So you, in relation to me, for instance, right? White people.
White people
are
the others. And why are the others so important? Because they...
So that's the interesting thing about Fanon's work. So this is in chapter 2, but in chapter 3 and 4, what he highlights is the different distribution of resources. Racism works because resources are differently distributed, which means that, for instance, resources doesn't mean just money, right? It means credibility, credibility meaning whether you're believed, whether you're heard, whether you get the education, whether you get platformed, like platform meaning like whether you have space in the society and so on. Yeah. So if they decide for you that you're going to be inferior, there's not much of a negotiating power. Yeah. That's why he cares about them. Yeah. It's a rule of it's a game of recognition where the rule is against you. Yeah. Right. So that's why he's.
Yeah. And his writing style it's very personal. So he writes a lot about his personal experience, right? Can you give another example of this? Because now it's about language. What are other examples where he describes this internalization of discrimination and racism?
Yeah, so he's a phenomenologist. I don't know whether you know of this. It's a methodology, basically. I do philosophy, but I do something else. I used to do phenomenology, but I changed. It's a methodology where introspection is part of it, and of course, introspection to observe your consciousness or stream of your consciousness. This is, I think, what also allowed his such a compelling narrative and a first-person autobiographical approach. What else? What makes his writing so nice? He's just a really damn good writer. He writes very well. Translation apparently doesn't really do justice. So if you read French, you should read it in French.
necessary. And how does this passage relate to the book's title? What does black skin, white masks mean?
You put on a white mask in order to pass. Well, not really pass, but in order to attempt to pass, and you will still be treated inferior. That's racism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he writes also about racism, as you explained, like as a deeply psychological process, right?
Mm-hmm.
How revolutionary was this approach in that time when he published his book?
Oh, a lot. So there is this person called Husserl, and Husserl was studied by some people called French existentialists and French phenomenologists such as Sartre or Merleau-Ponty. And Fanon studies them and actually converses with them. And Sartre is the one who wrote the preface for his other book, by The Wretched of the Earth, which I also recommend, but it's a bit more philosophical and a little bit boring, I think, compared to Black Skin, White Masks. It was incredibly influential because he provided a socio-economic analysis that is phenomenological, which is unprecedented, because that's like basically using the tool that is made for a specific goal and just taking it elsewhere, making it better. But also because he was talking about a perspective that was marginalized, right? But that's not the only reason why it's read. It's because it was very a good development of philosophy.
Yeah, and was it immediately embraced?
Yeah.
This perspective?
Yeah, it was. I think Fanon is part of the canon now, and I think it's taught quite often. I mean, if it's not, then I think it shows what kind of a school it is, actually.
But also in his time, was it embraced? Or?
No. He actually died really young, and he died while doing something totally... He wasn't a philosopher. He died as a freedom fighter, so he died in Algeria trying to free the country.
He also wrote a book about, right?
Yes, he does. And... but he did participate with these elitist circle. I mean, he had a correspondence as well, so it's a difficult thing to say, a difficult thing to determine. But was it received well as much as Sartre was? No, Sartre won Nobel Prize, right? I mean, he didn't. He, as in Fanon, didn't.
Yeah. But now he...
I think he is read lesser than Sartre, obviously, but I think he is canonized.
And why is this work? Because I said in the introduction, it's still very popular, mainly among activists as well. Mm-hmm. Why is it still so popular? Why does it still resonate that much?
He's a radical. At the end of the book, The Wretched of the Earth, what you can see is that he says, so there's a head and a tail. If you really want to be decolonial, the tail needs to become the head. And he says this cannot change unless the whole social structure changes. He's a radical. I think there's always an appeal to radical ideas, especially if it struggles against oppression. I think that's one selling point. Another selling point is, he's a founding father of decolonial thought, right? Yeah. And then he's not only a phenomenologist, he's also a political philosopher. He not only does political philosophy in this typical way, he's a Maoist all of a sudden. There's a lot of intersection and quite a full package, and he offers also he's a sexist. He offers a very interesting analysis of the veil, for instance, topics, perspectives that weren't really available, I guess. So, yeah.
He's a sexist, you said?
He is a sexist, yeah.
Can you explain a bit more?
In his third chapter, he writes about black women who wants to date/marry white men, and he's very despectful about it. Yeah, it's just a lack of nuance, eh? And then.
But let's end with it. Also, still popular because it's very beautifully written, right?
Yeah. I think so. His famous chapter is the 5th chapter, where he discusses the experience of being black, right? That's the literal translation, which is wrongly translated in English into the fact of blackness, which is fine, but it kind of doesn't really deliver the experience part. And there his really famous passage is the experience of being called the N-word by a white person while he's walking down the street. And he describes his kind of the internal experience of it, and the person who's using the N-word is a kid, right, or a small kid. And he first laughs because he finds it ridiculous, and then he becomes sad because he knows that he cannot fight it, because he's in this social situation where he cannot clap back, right? And I think that resonates with a lot of people today, given the context of radicalization and the rise of the extreme right and so on. And I think that's the reason, perhaps, why it's remained quite popular. Another reason why it is popular. Why is Kant popular? I don't know. Like, why is It's a good book.
It's a good book. Yeah, it's a good book. Let's end. The 10 minutes flew by.
Okay.
But we have still some questions from you in the audience. Who has a question for Seunghyun Song? Please raise your hand, and I will get the mic.
Oh yeah, that's the mic.
I heard a voice. Okay, I'm gonna try. I'm kind of afraid to throw it, but.
If I go to France and I want to learn a language, and I'm so desperate to complete every sentence, and if I can't, I'm just thinking, well, I cannot do that, you know. So I'm wondering if a black man or a woman, isn't it true that they always sort of thinking that they have to prove themselves to others, and if they don't succeed, they say, okay, you're a racist, or, you know, discrimination. Instead of that, if you don't think like that, if you're not insecure, you never think I'm being, someone is, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, there are several facets, right? So I study about, so there is a thing called language attitudes. When you're accented, depending on what your accent is, you're treated differently. French accent is often sexualized, you know, Chinese accent is often denigrated. Depends on the accent, and it's often following the line of other types of oppression, right? So there's one thing, such as that, but you're highlighting something really interesting. Basically, language is always learned. Forget a tourist or an immigrant or an expat who moves to another country, but just think about children. Children must learn languages, and they undergo the same sort of assimilative processes as furtively observing their own usage of grammar, words, and so on. There's a difference depending on how your native tongue, the basis of that identity, the fact that you speak a language as a native, it often grants you with the authority to be creative. Depending on your social identity, this authority that you might enjoy is distributed in an unfair way. If you appear in a way that is often stigmatized, that authority, despite you having that creativity, is not granted to you. I think that's what Fanon is criticizing. Yeah.
Can you throw it back to me?
You're welcome. Thanks for the
One more
the
question. Please raise your hand. Yeah.
You said you changed your methodology from phenomenology to something else. Why
Yes.
did you choose it? Yeah, what were the reasons to change?
Oh, yeah. So I wanted to not diagnose but prescribe. So phenomenology is really good at diagnosing what the problem is. But I wanted to talk more about responsibility, what needs to be done. So I do something called theories of justice, which is a field within political philosophy that is called analytic philosophy. What they usually do is to abstract complex things, kind of like put them away and then focus on what should be done. To put it otherwise, we know what racism is. We don't have to update its understanding. We need to do something about it. And I was more curious about what should be done about it, and that's why I changed.
Can I have a very big applause for Seunghyun Song?
Oh,
Thank you.